I was intrigued to find on the internet today a photograph of Raymond Vile's excavations in the city of David. These excavations were in 1913. You can get a sense, you sense, by the way, already that we are just below the city of David. You can see the Jerusalem wall up on the left. We're in this little valley that is below Jerusalem, where the first city was. And Raymond Vile discovered in these excavations a tablet with an inscription in Greek. Interesting, by the way, that Greek is the language used for the inscription. It's clearly coming from the early years of the current era. So the Romans are ruling Palestine at that point. But the inscription is in Greek. It's very clearly legible to those who know Greek. And I just brought a translation for it, a translation of it below for you. Theodotus was the son of Vatenus, who's priest, and he's head of the synagogue. The Greek word is archisynagogos. He's head of the synagogue. You could say Rosh Beit HaKnesset. And he's son of the head of the synagogue and a grandson of the head of the synagogue. And he built this synagogue for reading the Torah and for teaching the commandments, as well as the guest room, the chambers, the water fittings, as an inn for those in need from abroad, the synagogue which his fathers founded. So we know that there was a synagogue in the city of David right next to the Beit Mikdash, and there was someone there called the head of the synagogue, Rosh HaKnesset, or Rosh Beit HaKnesset. And we're going to come to this in the Mishnah. We're at the beginning of the 7th chapter of Yoma, and the goat has been sent away, and some of the sacrifices have been taken out to be burnt. And now the high priest is going to read from the Sefer Torah. Ba'alo Kohen Gadol likrot. The high priest comes to read. Interesting, we learned already, by the way, that the high priest may not have been an educated person, but it sounds as though at this point he knows how to read, or maybe he's been taught how to read. Imrat salikrot bevigdei boots kore. If he wants to read in the linen garments, these are the special linen garments, the white linen that he's been performing the service in so far. If he wants to wear those, he can. For imlo kore beitz talit lavan mishlo. He reads in his own white cloak. And this shows us, according to the Rambam, that this is not part of the temple service. It's very interesting. There's no reference in the Psukim in Vayikra to reading the Sefer Torah on this day. Absolutely no reference. The only reference we hear to reading the Sefer Torah is in Devarim. It's the mitzvah of Hakel. So the king reads the Sefer Torah, but there's no reference in Torah to the Kohen Gadol reading the Sefer Torah. And yet, here he is reading it in the middle of the service of Yom Kippur. So here it's almost as if we can see the synagogue and the temple meeting. And we read, Chazan HaKnesset notel Sefer Torah. The synagogue Chazan would take a Sefer Torah, take a Torah scroll, nor the Rosh HaKnesset, and he'd give it to the head of the synagogue. That's the person we've read about in the inscription. Archisynagogos. He'd give it to the head of the synagogue. Ve'rosh HaKnesset not nor skan, and the head of the synagogue will give it to the deputy high priest. Ve'askan not nor Kohen Gadol, and the deputy high priest will give it to the high priest. So there's a kavod, there's an honor given both to the Sefer Torah and to the high priest, in the sense that the Sefer is passed through this chain from the Chazan of the synagogue through to the Kohen Gadol. And then Ve'Kohen Gadol omed u'makabel ve'koreh omed, and the high priest would stand and receive it, and he would receive it and he'd read standing up. Interesting that he's going to stand to read. There's a Mishnah in Megillah, Hakoret HaMegillah Omed V'Yoshev. Someone who's reading the Megillah can stand or sit. And the Gemara immediately comments, Masha Ein Ken Batorah. That's not the case for the Torah. In the Gemara and Megillah, we already recognize that one's not permitted to read from the Torah except standing. There's a certain respect due to reading the Torah, and that's what the Kohen Gadol, even though he's Kohen Gadol, he stands out of respect for Torah. And he reads the portion of Acharei Mot. That's the portion actually that we read today in our Torah reading on Yom Kippur, and he reads Ve'ach Be'asor. That's the description of Yom Kippur in the parsha of Emor, which actually we don't read today. Golel Sefer Torah umanicho b'cheko, and then he rolls up the Sefer Torah and he puts it in his bosom. He kind of tucks it away. He holds it to his right, his chest, and he says, "Yoter mimash karati lifnechem katuv kan." There's more than what I've read out that is written here. And then he carries on reading. Uve asor she be chumash hapkudim kore al pei. So he's saying, look, there's more than what I've read out. I'm rolling up the Sefer, and now I'm going to read to you something off by heart. He's going to read from Be'asor, from on the 10th. This is a reference to on the 10th day. And that's from the parsha of Pinchas in the book of Numbers. So the book of Numbers, or what we call it Chumash HaBamidbar, but it's called Chumash HaPekudim, the book of the book of Numbers, really, the book of the counting. He's going to read from there off by heart. Why is he reading off by heart? Well, the Gemara explains that if you put away one Sefer Torah and then you pick up another one, people might think that the first one is not kosher. So we don't want to do that. We're certainly not going to do that in the Beit Mikdash. On the other hand, if we roll all the way from Vayikra to Bamidbar, that's a long way, and the whole of the community is standing around waiting. And it's not the expression used in the Talmud, it's kavod hatzibur. It's not honorable to the public to make them stand around and wait. And neither option, neither rolling on nor bringing another sefer, seems to be acceptable. So in this case, he reads it off by heart. Koreh al peh. He reads off by heart. And then he makes a bracha. Umvarech aleha shmona brachot. And he reads, afterwards he makes 8 brachot. Aha Torah, the Gemara explains this is just the regular bracha we make on Torah reading. It might be Asher Bachabanu Mikol Ha'amiv Nasan Lanu Torah Torah. It might be Asher Nasan Lanu Torah Emet V'Chayei Olam Tav Yochein. It's one of the 2 brachot for the Torah. The Al Ha'avodah, that's Ritzei from Shmones, right, from the Amida. The Al Ha'oda'ah, on the Thanksgiving, that's the bracha of Modim from the Shmones, right? The Al Mchilat Ha'avon, that's the special blessing for Yom Kippur. The Al Hamikdash Bifnei Atzmo, and he makes a bracha for the temple. The Al Yisrael, and on Israel, Bifnei Atzmam. The Al Yerushalayim Bifnei Atzmam, and on Jerusalem on its own. The Al HaKohanim Bifnei Atzmam, and he makes a bracha for the Kohanim. The Al Sha'ar HaTefillah, and then he recites the rest of the Tefillah. And don't do this now, but if you go to the source sheet and you count these brachot, you'll see that there are not 8 brachot, there are 9 brachot. There seems to be 1 extra bracha in the printed text. And sure enough, the bracha for Jerusalem, Al Yerushalayim, is actually not there in the Kaufman manuscript, and it's not there in the Gemara. So somehow we've got maybe we got mixed up between 8 and 9, and in one version of the Gemara that I've seen, the bracha for Israel is not there. So maybe there are 2 versions. Maybe there are 2 versions of this Mishnah, one with for Israel and one with for Jerusalem, and somehow the printed text we have incorporates both, and the number of 8 goes up to 9. And the Rambam comments here, Hakriya Haitab Ezrat Hanashim. The reading was actually in the woman's court. And it's very interesting here. We see the same thing with Ezra. When Ezra comes back to Jerusalem from Bavel, he finds a demoralized a community which is really degraded and demoralized. And he reads from the Torah in the middle of the town square in Jerusalem. And the book of Nehemiah records there that he reads to men, women, and children. And it's very interesting that the Rambam comments here, the reading was in the women's court. In other words, it was in a place in the temple where everybody could hear, men, women, and children. How does he prove this? Because a person is allowed to sit down there, to sit down in the women's court. Ki amru omed. And the text says he stood and read. And the fact that he said that he stood is proof that he was sitting until then. And he was allowed to sit in the women's court. And then the Rambam goes on to say, in all of the other parts of the temple, lo yeshev shumadam, no one was allowed to sit. Eile klal, nobody was allowed to sit. Eile malchei Beit David bilvad, only the kings of the house of Israel. So this Torah reading here seems to be it seems to echo the reading of Ezra. Perhaps it echoes the reading of Hakel. Perhaps it echoes the reading that we do today in Shul, in which, at least according to the Magen Avraham and other opinions, women are included as well as men. And then the Rambam finishes, V'chotem baruch atah Hashem shomea tefillah. The Mishnah says he finishes with the rest of the tefillah, and the Rambam is more specific. He finishes with the bracha of Baruch atah Hashem shomea tefillah, who hears prayer. And of course, this is especially important on Yom Kippur, and it's interesting that the Rambam brings this on the, let's say, in the middle of the temple service of Yom Kippur. And here we can see, if you like, the synagogue and the temple meeting, and of course, at the end of the 7th chapter, as we move into the 8th chapter of Yoma, we'll see the temple service pass away, and we'll come into Yom Kippur as it's dealt with in the synagogue today. Someone who sees the high priest when he reads doesn't see the bull and the goat that are being burned. We learned in yesterday's Mishnah that the bull and the goat are taken to be burnt outside Jerusalem. So you can't see both simultaneously. And the Mishnah continues, someone who sees the bull and the goat which are being burnt, can't see the Kohen Gadol reading. Not that it's forbidden to go from one to the other. It's not forbidden to break off, if you like, participating in one mitzvah, to go and participate in a different mitzvah. It's not forbidden. But it was far away. And the work of both was like one. They were both happening simultaneously. So you couldn't possibly make both events. But you were permitted in principle to break off from one mitzvah to participate in another mitzvah. And then the Mishnah continues, and we're going to rush here because we're out of time. Im b'vigdei boots korei kidesh yadav v'raglav pashat yadav v'taval alav v'nistapeg. If he read in the garments of linen, in other words, if he read in the holy linen garments, then he'd have to sanctify his hands and his feet and strip off his clothes and go down, immerse himself and come up and dry himself. And the assumption is that if he's reading in his own clothes, he would already have carried out these. And then they bring him the golden clothes. Heviu lo bigdei zahav, they bring him the golden clothes, velavash, v'kidesh ragav yadav v'raglav. We've seen this before. He puts on the golden clothes, he sanctifies his hands and feet again, and then he can go on with the temple service. V'yatsa v'yasait et elo ve'et el ha'am. He's going to go and sacrifice his ram and the ram of the peoples. And ve'et shivat kvasim smimim b'nei shana. These are all mentioned, by the way, in the Parsha of Pinchas, which he's just read. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Eliezer. And Rabbi Akiva has a slightly different timetable. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Im Tamid Shal Shahar Hayu Korebim. Rabbi Akiva says these were actually offered up with the morning Tamid. And he has a pasuk to prove this. Ufar ha'olah v'sa'ir ha'na'aseh b'chutz hayu korebim im tamid shel bein ha'arbaim. And the bull for the whole offering and the goat which was offered up outside. This is the goat that's offered up not in the Holy of Holies, but on the outside altar. They are offered up with the evening tamid.